Today, we're talking about body image at midlife and how having a poor body image can impact your confidence at midlife. And we'll be discussing ways to overcome these challenges so that you can find the confidence and courage to make big life changes, like pivoting your career in your 40s. Joining us today is Dr. Breese Annable, a clinical psychologist and certified eating disorder specialist who comes with over 15 years of experience helping women with body image and eating disorders, and now her specialty is helping women pivot careers. So let's get started.
Hi, Breeze. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so grateful that you're here. But before we get started, can you please introduce yourself? Who are you really, and what's your story?
Yes. Well, thank you so much for having me today. I am so excited for our conversation today. So, I'm Dr. Breese Annable. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist, and I guess, clinical psychologist turned and added midlife women's coach. And so, in addition to my work as a psychologist, I also help midlife women with career change and career pivots.
That's wonderful. I think you will be so valuable to the audience on this podcast because this is all about, going through that midlife change and pivoting. And so I want to talk about some of the psychological hurdles that women face in their 40s. Specifically surrounding low self esteem, confidence, body image. And so I'd love to hear your experience with it, as well as, how you help other women in this stage, use it
Yeah.
as a growing stage rather than something that's, considered a pitfall.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, gosh, lots to talk about there. But I'll start off maybe sharing just a little bit about myself and my personal life. As I mentioned, because it very much tracks my career life as well. I started my career and continued to be an eating disorder specialist, and so I have worked with many women over, oh gosh, almost 15 years, not only with eating disorders, but hand in hand with body image. And so this is work that I've done with so many women over a lot of years. But personally, I think you're hard pressed to find any woman who doesn't deal with body image issues or hasn't at some point in their lives.
Mhm.
And so for myself, when I started in the field as a psychologist, I was very young. I was in my early 20s, and um, I was by the time I entered into the field as a psychologist, I had
Mm.
done a lot of personal work, but was in the process of being in recovery from an eating disorder myself. I had dealt with an eating disorder in my early 20s, and so I just, we can talk about it more in depth if you would like, but at the time, the idea of having lived experience really wasn't something that was really embraced or talked about a lot in the mental health
Mhm.
field as a therapist. And so at that time in my life, it was pretty compartmentalized, the work that I was doing with therapists and kind of my own personal life as well. But certainly I know all too well what it's like to experience really negative body image. And knowing how consuming it is and it can be,
Mhm.
and how much it can impact certainly only our relationship with our bodies, but it affects everything. It affects, what's happening internally with our thoughts and our emotions, but it affects how we show up in the world. And so, I just have such a deep personal experience of what that is like to really be in the depths of negative body image. And then having spent many decades working on that and improving my relationship with my body. So I can really, when I come to my work now, I see it so much through the lens of my personal experience and my personal relationship with my body.
Yeah, that's so important. I've worked with several therapists before too, and it's really, really helpful when the therapists themselves have experienced similar things as you, because then it's coming from a definitely more grounded, experience based stories and advice, and it feels more authentic and
Yep.
less theoretical. And it's definitely helpful and a lot more relatable. I
Yeah.
appreciate you sharing that with me. I'm curious. So your eating disorder started in your 20s. How did it evolve? I know that you're a mother, so you said it spanned over decades. So what did it look like, and how did it evolve? And what was your relationship with your, I guess, self-esteem in the process of all the stages that you went through in the past decades?
Yeah. Well, in the beginning, I gosh, it was really a coming together. I remember it so clearly. It was this coming together of, going through some things in my personal life that were really painful at the time. And then I remember it so clearly. I was studying abroad at the time, as many people do in college, and I had two of my roommates say, "Oh, we need to go to the gym and lose some weight."
Mm,
And in hindsight, I'd never really realized I had a really healthy relationship with my body. It wasn't something that I thought about a whole lot. I had a healthy relationship with food. It was just this, and maybe this is retrospect. I've kind of created this narrative, I don't know, but in my memory, it just felt like this moment where this light bulb went off of like, oh, that's what I can do.
mhm,
And so it really started a process of this hyper focus around weight loss and controlling food, and hyper fixation on my body and my weight and my size. And um, at the time, it was a very isolating experience, because for a lot of people that go through that, and certainly myself included, there's so much shame with it. And, it's
mhm.
something that really just can spiral and escalate because it's such a secret in a lot of ways. And so, um, really, and I think this is where it connects to self-esteem very much. In hindsight, I just look at myself, and it just seems like there was this sense of like, am I good enough now? How about now? Am I good enough now? And, and then any change in my body in the direction that I didn't want it to be was terrifying, because, my body very much felt like this way that, like I was saying, it just in hindsight looks like this almost like pleading of like, am I good enough now?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I definitely think your experience can, a lot of women can relate to your experience, whether it's, in their younger years or later,
Yeah.
especially in midlife, because you go through so many changes. I mean, you look at yourself from pictures, in your 20s versus now, and
Oh my
it
gosh.
there's a stark difference, right? And it's hard not to notice it, not to acknowledge the difference. And I remember, like, your body image just completely gets, rocked or shaken during your pregnancy and after, and you don't really fully recover. But can you talk more about, I guess, what you've seen with women in midlife, and how their body image at midlife has impacted their self-esteem, and what does it look like? What are the characteristics? Because I think, when you think about low self-esteem, you have this almost dramatic um, image of someone with like sloped shoulders, like really sad. And it's not that. I think every woman that I know of has body image, concerns or issues. And it's just not something that you either talk openly about. You just kind of accept that your body has gone through this gigantic change, especially after giving birth. But I know that a lot of women struggle with it. And so, what does it look like when someone has low self esteem, or are struggling with, confidence or body image in their midlife?
Yeah, well, I was just chuckling when you were talking about, seeing the changes that your body goes through in midlife. I mean, just, and again, this is more personally, I think I have had the thought many times, like, my 20-year-old self would be horrified at
Mhm.
really of like what the changes that my body has gone through and what my body looks like now is quite literally all the fears that I had when I was in my 20s. And so I don't know, I'm just thinking this now as we're talking, I'm almost thinking like, gosh, how grateful I am that I had that experience in my 20s and
Mhm.
then have done so much work because I have done a tremendous amount of work around my relationship with my body. I think that it has allowed me to come into midlife as equipped as anyone can be. And of course, and I don't want to make it
Mhm.
sound like by any means I have it figured out. Um, but I feel like I have been continuing to work on my relationship with my body so that I'm meeting those moments where I look at the changes of my body and going, okay, here it is. Here it is. This is my body as it is. And my work is to accept what it is. And gosh, yes. So that's just, on a personal note, the thoughts that were going through my mind as you were talking. Um, but yeah, as far as low self-esteem, I think this is a generalization, but I think in a lot of ways negative body image, certainly for some people, it may cause low self, somebody's body
Mhm.
changes, should I say, can cause low self-esteem. But a lot of times I think about it more is that it highlights what's already in existence. For example, um, if you have a sense of yourself of like, I feel good about, well, we'll just say about my body, um, a lot of times that's a very conditional acceptance for us, especially if, we're somebody who has the genetics that our body has lined up with
Mhm.
what society tells us the ideal is. Um, we may have like fairly good self-esteem around our bodies. And again, that's certainly not true for everybody.
Mhm.
But then when the body starts to change in all of like the pretty radical ways that it does for most of us in midlife, a lot of times I think it can heighten and highlight the conditional acceptance that was there. It was like, and again, I think about our bodies as almost
Mhm.
communicating like, can you accept me now? Can you accept me now with the wrinkles? Can you accept me now with the rolls? Like, as our body ages, it's going like, what about now? Can you accept me now?
Yeah, I love that you said that it highlights an existing like self-esteem issue because I really feel like, low self-esteem and body image, you're absolutely right. Just having poor body image or a bad relationship with your body doesn't necessarily cause low self-esteem, but I think maybe it is something that's physical that you can kind of latch onto. Also can relate to the fact that, as you progress throughout life, it is challenging you to say, can you accept me now? Because especially during childbirth, and the aftermath of that, it's just all of these things that you felt you once had control over, you can't control, your you
Yeah.
know, your when you sneeze, right? There's issues now. And I mean, there's just things that you cannot control anymore. And it really
Yes.
challenges you to loosen your grip on it and realize that you don't have that much control and you have to
Abs
accept. I would love to learn, I guess, more ways that women could try to practice acceptance because that's very hard to do. I think it's, easy to say you have to accept yourself and love yourself unconditionally, but it's really, really challenging to do, especially when you have an inner critic that's like latched on to maybe your physical appearance or whatever you're feeling very insecure about, right? And, motherhood and, just growing, aging in general challenges you to, you know, face it front on because there's no way of controlling every aspect of that part of your body. So I'm curious, like, how do you coach other women to do that?
Yes, absolutely. I'm so glad that you asked this question. I will tell you it's one of my favorite things to talk about for 2 reasons. Number 1, my pet peeve is when people say, you just have to accept, right? It's usually that word
Yeah,
just,
yeah, yeah,
which,
yeah.
which implies, number one, that it's easy. And number two, that we know how to do that. It's like people toss around the word acceptance, but I don't know about you. Until I became a psychologist, nobody ever taught me, well, what is acceptance really? And how do you actually do it? So I love talking with people about this. And so first, I think it's helpful to think about, okay, well, what does not accepting look like? And I love that you mentioned
Mhm.
control, because control is really this way of, trying to say, well, this is what I want it to be, you know, and that's, sorry, this idea of like, this is not what is, this is like what I think my body should be, what I want it to be. And so that's the definition of not accepting, right? It's the opposite. It's acceptance is really the radical acknowledgement of this is as it is, which again is very often not what we want it to be. The wrinkles on our face, the times that we pee when we
Mhm.
sneeze or laugh, or the,
Yeah, yeah.
all the changes that our bodies go through. That's what it is, which again is very often not what we want it to be. So it's really those moments of meeting those moments and where we could respond with trying to control or change, or, if we talk about our bodies, try to change it in some way to try to, you know, keep the wrinkles from coming or make our body appear smaller, or all the hundreds of ways that we could react by trying to control what our body looks like. But it's recognizing that that exact same moment is an opportunity where we can actually meet our body as it is. And here's the way that I think about it is that I talk with people and they come to me to do body image work. I say, okay, here's the thing. You are in couples therapy with yourself. It's like you are coming to couples therapy with your body, because it is a relationship, exactly like, for those of us who are married or have a really long-term relationship, you know, who my husband was in his 20s and who I was in my 20s is not who we are in our 40s. My kids look at pictures of us in our 20s, and when they were little, they were like, they literally had no idea who we were.
Yeah,
We have
yeah.
changed that, and so again, it's like in marriage, as the years and the decades go on, you're continually asked to accept that person for who they're becoming. Um, and our relationship with our body is no different. It is this ever-present relationship that we have.
Yeah, I mean, I love that analogy because I think it is very true. It is a relationship, and it's a really intimate one because it's, really your thoughts and your perception of yourself, and then there's you. I mean, there's
Yeah.
really, there are other people and other voices that impact it, but you know, it is very much so intimate because you're the only one that's able to see and,
Yeah.
I guess recognize how you're feeling about yourself. So it is very intimate. And as you were saying this, similar to, I guess in couples therapy, you have to be very conscious. And so to, I guess, kind of shift this into a discussion about are there some habits and hacks or psychological tricks. I don't like any of those verses, but are there any tips and habits that you would recommend to help you, recognize when you're at that point, recognizing, hey, this is not where I want to be, or maybe you're not happy with your body image, and then meeting yourself with acceptance. I feel like that
Yeah.
requires a high level of consciousness because it's so often ingrained in our, in our thoughts that it's hard to even recognize that we're already, saying negative things about ourselves. Like when we're scrolling on social media, or I don't know, flipping through a magazine if you're old school. And so, you see these
Yeah.
images of what you thought you were going to be or what you wish or hope to be. And
Yeah.
inside you're having a dialogue, but you're not really conscious all the time of it. So, is there a way to recognize those moments, and is there a way to, I guess, steer them away from, negative thoughts that could, worsen your relationship with either your self-esteem or body image,
Mhm.
whatever it is?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think you hit the nail on the head where you said it requires a level of consciousness and awareness. So that would be step number one is and just practically that's like be on the lookout for it and be on the lookout for what are the ways that I tend to react. Right. And again, it could be for some people, it can be negative thoughts about themselves, criticisms, comparisons. Oof, that's a big one.
Hmm.
So it could be looking out for comparisons. My body doesn't look like that. Or again, negative thoughts. Also, we were touching before on like ways of trying to control. So maybe you start looking
Hmm.
up diets or anti-wrinkle creams or, all of these ways. It's those reactions. So that's the first thing is noticing what are the things that I tend to do? Because, we all have my clients, I talk with them about our greatest hits. We all have certain places that
Hmm.
our mind tends to go or we tend to go. So that's the first thing is being aware of it because the more aware of it you are, you can catch it quicker. I always say it's easier to stop a car at 30 than it is at 80. So the sooner you can catch it, the better. And then the second piece really is like, I think about it as like coming back, following the string back to that moment of like, what was it that I felt in that moment that made me feel like I needed to compare or fix this or change this? What is it in that moment? And you said it earlier. If we want to, at the beginning, especially kind of lead ourselves, you might say, like, what is it that I hoped that I would be? Or what is it that I wish that my body looked like? And so, really, when we're talking about when we're talking about acceptance, honestly, really often we're talking about loss, we're talking about grief,
Hmm.
we're talking about recognizing the loss of what we wish, what we want, and being willing to then um, I talk about acceptance as really this like radical honesty and acknowledgement of what is, but so it's really coming to that moment of saying, I wish my body was like this, and it's this instead. And I think a lot of times too, you can even take that a step further and say, what is it about having that kind of body that I would like to have? What do I think life would be like? So maybe it's getting to the heart of like, I want to be seen as attractive to other people. I want to be seen as admirable to other people. So all that to be said, it's getting to the heart of it, and not staying on the surface. It's really getting to the heart of it and coming more close to what the desires and the wishes are, and then accepting and then moving towards the reality of what is. The last thing I would say about that is that, as I talk about it, even I put my hand on my heart kind of instinctually because when we talk about a relationship, it's also coming to yourself in that moment also with a lot of compassion and just recognizing the pain that's in those moments. Aging is hard.
Yeah.
Our those changes are hard. And so just being with ourselves and sometimes it's as simple as that. Putting your hand on your heart and just going, "Damn, this is hard." But just with sincere radical honesty with yourself.
Yeah, I love that you brought up self-compassion because I think that's been such a key tool, I guess, in my late 30s. I think it's something that, self-acceptance, it's hard in your teenage years. It's hard in every stage. Um, and I think in your 30s, you do care a little bit less about what others think of you, but because you've gone through so many changes and, studies show that your confidence decreases as you age, and there's a confidence gap that starts even at age 6 for girls. And so there is this huge confidence gap. And so as you're going through your midlife, you're dealing with this low self-esteem and you're trying to accept things. But if you haven't ever learned, even in your previous, decades, then you're trying to learn it like a newborn, but you're in your 30s, and it feels a little silly. But the self-compassion thing, I've practiced it myself, and it's actually really, really helpful. I do this
Yes.
thing called self-compassion letters. I'm not sure if you recommend this to your to your clients, but writing yourself a letter as if you were the best friend listening to you vent about your current feelings and problems, and it helps you to remove yourself from these, like, you know maybe painful thoughts that you have about yourself, and then be there for yourself, and you're able to provide what you're seeking rather than seeking it elsewhere, or rather than latching on to, a desire, whatever it is to distract you from that pain. It helps you confront it head on, but with a positive
Yes.
tone. And so I really do agree with you. Self compassion is a huge component of, learning to accept yourself unconditionally. And I think it's been a huge game changer. And I talk about it to everyone I know. So I'm so glad you brought it up. Because it is really
Right?
hard to practice, because no one teaches that to you. I don't remember ever hearing. I mean, maybe in your field, you know about it as a normal
Yeah.
layperson. I had never known about self-compassion letters, and so it's been a tremendous help. But I absolutely agree, self-compassion is definitely a gateway to learning self-acceptance.
Yes, oh my gosh, I mean, it's everything because I
Mhm,
talk with people, and let me just say, like, I love this idea of showing up as our own best friend. It can sound
mhm.
a little cheesy at first, but for
Yes.
some people, but the actual practice of it is just like you said, it's a game changer.
Mhm,
Because if you think about it, it's like nobody thinks it's cheesy, for example, to be going through pain, through going through loss, and having those people in your life show up for you. And sometimes it's in ways that there's nothing to be done except come and give you a
mhm,
hug or put an arm around you in the pain. That is a game changer. And this is why it's so important that we start to think about our relationship to ourself is no different. And here's
mhm,
the really cool thing. Our brain also doesn't know the difference. They have done studies that show this, that when we even like give ourselves a hug or rub our arm or do physical acts of compassion, just like a loved one or a friend might, our brain responds in the exact same way. And so it's like if we can get out of our head about it and just be in the experience of it, it absolutely changes things. Because if you think about it, it's like if I can move through every stage of my life being there for myself and showing up with compassion for myself, again, it radically changes all these ways that we inevitably meet pain and change throughout life.
Yeah, I mean, I'm so glad you brought up the fact that our brain can't distinguish, who's giving the hug, essentially. But
Yes.
that is so important, because that's the power of it all, is this realization that whatever you're missing in your life in terms of emotional comfort or validation, that if you were doing these exercises and practicing self compassion, that you can actually fulfill your own needs. And that's so incredibly powerful to think about. Like, I mean, I know, it's important to have, loved ones in your life and whatnot, but if you're really struggling and if you're really alone, knowing that there are practices like self-compassion letters that you can do to be there for yourself, it's just so empowering. You can fulfill those needs, you can be there for yourself. And it's interesting what happens after doing those practices. I've noticed that your brain starts to automate that process without having to do the actual exercise. So in some way you're training your brain to
Yes.
talk to yourself as if a best friend is talking to yourself from repeatedly doing those exercises. And it's like,
Yes.
to me, that's why I call it a game changer, because it was so incredible. But I feel like
Yes.
you're absolutely right. It's so, so key to self-acceptance. And I can't, I mean, we will have to move on, but I love it because I personally have had great experience with it. I'm so glad that you're also teaching this to your clients. And speaking of that, I'm curious, what are the commonalities that you see in your clients that have really, really helped them find their confidence in their midlife and apply it to help their careers, to help pivot, like make these really big life changes that's going to impact them or their families? And what would you say, I guess, is your process for helping women to identify, one, the source of their confidence issues, and two, how you actually strategize to help them rebuild that confidence in their midlife?
Yes. Well, I would say one of the most important things, literally, if I teach nothing else, this is, gosh, half the battle, I would say. Um, but I think it's really first and foremost a process of getting, again, it's the same thing we're talking about. It's getting incredibly and intimately connected with yourself. Um, and, some people use the term intuition. From the world that I'm in, we talk about it as the concept of wise mind, meaning this idea that there is this inherent wisdom in all of us. And it's helping people to be able to access it, identify it, hear it. Like we've been talking about with self-compassion, the cool thing about it is like once you learn to hear it, once you learn to hear your wise mind or intuition, that signal gets stronger. I talk with people about it being like a radio dial, that at first maybe it sounds really
Mhm.
staticky because, for example, maybe you have a lot of self-doubt or a lot of negative
Mhm.
self-talk or, all of those things that really, I say like put static on the line. It becomes harder to be connected to yourself. And so really it's helping people to start to hear the communication through the static, and to strengthen that connection so that they hear that part of themselves. Because I will tell you the amount of times, if we even just talk about career change, usually I'll start off a conversation with somebody and they'll be saying, "Gosh, I just have no idea what I want to do. I'm completely lost. I just am so stuck." And I don't want to dismiss. Sometimes that's the case. I've been in that place in my life. Sometimes we just don't know what the next thing is. That being said, the majority of times when I start to talk to women a little bit more and ask more questions, all of a sudden there starts to be, well, I've always actually really wanted to do this, or I've always really loved this. Like, it's in there, and very
Mhm.
often it just takes somebody, um, probing a little bit more or asking those questions, and it's like it's there. There is this part of ourselves that, again, a lot of times people cover it up or don't hear it really
Mhm.
clearly because there's, again, maybe self-doubt. Oh, I could never do that. Or, oh, it's too risky. Maybe they just shelve it before they let themselves even explore that possibility. But so that's the first thing. Very often it's allowing
Mhm.
yourself to first just get really connected to your wisdom and your intuition in there, because talk about another game changer. If I taught two things,
Mhm.
okay, I'm going to go three. If I taught three things, it would be
Yeah.
intuition and wisdom,
Mhm.
self-compassion, and radical acceptance. And they all go hand in hand. The more we accept ourselves, that noise can quiet down, and then we can be more connected to ourselves and make decisions from that place. And it really is this internal guide that can very often help to to see the path ahead when we talk about any changes, but specifically midlife career change.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's very, very relatable to a lot of women. I think, often especially in your midlife, there's many that are lost. And, a lot of people are so multifaceted, but you do have to make decisions. And so I really am curious what you do when someone finally does, quiet down their noise, but there's still this layer of self doubt. How do you help women get past that to even just experimenting or even just, starting? I think there's people that are very comfortable with, the decisions that they have made, but they might not necessarily be, you know, I guess doing what excites them or, what makes them happy, but they're very, comfortable. But there's this layer
Yeah.
of confusion. And like you said, it might be, something related to being masked by fear and self-doubt. So how do you, once the noise goes down and they hear multiple ideas, how do you get women to be brave enough to take the risk to even start experimenting about the idea of pivoting?
Yeah. Well, I think what you just said really is most of it. It's this idea of experimentation. I think that is so important because I think, especially for those of us who have, been professionals and pursued professional careers, I can speak for myself, like, there was this sense of like, okay, here's the path. And, I had some twists and turns within that, but for the most part, it was kind of like, here's the path. And I check the boxes and I do the things and, I'm capable of all of those things. And so it can be really disorienting to be in this place where it's like, I don't know, or I don't feel confident, or I don't know that what this is going to look like or whether I'll be successful. That is really, really challenging. So, a big part is learning this mindset of experimentation and having this curiosity really lead the way. And ultimately, it's about letting go of the outcome of what we do and really focus on the step itself. Because again, I think for so many of us, we're so outcome oriented and or we want to feel sure that we're going to be
Mhm.
successful or how it's going to go. And the reality is that like in times like so many of us come to in midlife, there is just no way to know for sure. And so, again, this idea of embracing, I talk about it as like being a scientist in our own lives
Mhm.
and being willing to say, like, let me try this experiment, see what happens, take that data, and then I move forward. But it's really leveraging curiosity to lead us. And then again, it's like paired with that intuition. Um, and again, this idea that the step itself is the important thing, and we cannot know how it's going to turn out. So, as far as the bravery that comes with that, I think very often it is that connection to ourselves. I talk with people about it as I preface the sentence of like, what do I know to be true?
Mhm.
And if you pose that question to yourself, okay, what do I know to be true? Even if it is one step, then you take that step. And so it's very often this series of like, okay, what do I know to be true now? And what do I know to be true now?
Yeah, I really, really like that a lot. I mean, I think, it kind of goes back to what we were discussing earlier about this control. Being so hyper focused on the outcome is to me another way that you're trying to control the outcome of what you're doing. And so again, this is about relenting control and giving into the process and going step by
Yes.
step rather than looking ahead, looking at things that might be in your control but most likely are not in your control a lot of the times. And so again, it ties back into being able to focus on that first step and then also to accept things as they are and kind of give up control of the outcome, because I think for so long, you're trained to write goals, even in a very specific way. I don't know if you know about the SMART goals,
Oh
where it
yeah.
has to be like this specific, measurable, all that stuff. And it's so strange because it's always tied to an outcome that a lot of the times is not in your control, especially working in a corporation. A lot of the
Yeah.
milestones are not necessarily within your controls most of the time. Um, Unless it's like personal growth, which is a little bit different. But yeah, and so we're kind of conditioned to tie ourselves so much into these, outcomes that aren't within our control. And so I
Yes.
definitely started to write goals that are based off of the process of things I can control. And it makes a
Yes.
huge difference because it really helps you to, really focus in on the steps that required to finish a goal that you fully control rather than the outcome that is definitely controlled by other people or how other people respond to it or whatever it is. And it's
Yes,
very, very helpful.
absolutely. Yeah, I think you're
Yeah.
spot on that in seeing the connection, because very often for so many women, I mean, I certainly had this experience, in earlier in my life, this way of controlling the external, or having achievements, this way of having external validation. And again, we can look at that from a body image perspective. I'm going to control how my body looks. We can look at this from professional achievements.
Mhm.
I got the degree, I got the certification, I got the promotion, all of these ways that we can focus on the external, to not only guide what's next, or and to feel then, our confidence ends up resting in those external things. And so this is where I think midlife is just this invitation, I think, for so many women to start to learn to have that validation and have all of that shift more to internal, rather than having confidence and validation and our self-worth be dependent on these external things. And that's when we were talking about earlier of how when our body starts changing, it's kind of
Mhm.
it I'll say it's an invitation. Sometimes it's like our body
Yeah.
forcing us to go, listen, like you can't continue. It's an unstable place to
Yeah.
rest your sense of worth and confidence in yourself, because it's going to change and it can't be in your control. And it's when we try to keep it that way, or it's like, and again, or whether it's our body changing, or we come to the point in our careers where we go, oh, this isn't what I want to do anymore. Whereas before the path had been really set and we were like, check the box and take the steps. But then you come to this place where you're like, oh shit, I don't want to do this
Yeah.
anymore. Or, so again, it's just this invitation to have a radically different relationship to how we relate to ourselves and make decisions and move through the world and move through our lives.
Yeah. I mean, think what you said was so perfect because I think it is very much about having, been conditioned to tie your self-worth to external validations and a lot of things that we can't control. And then you help clients, create, internal validations and practice internal validation so that they don't have to, be, at the mercy of external validations. And I think that's extremely helpful and powerful. It's incredible. And so I'm
Yes.
so glad you came on the show to talk about, all of this stuff because it's such a powerful message. If there is one takeaway you want listeners to walk away with, what would it be?
Oh, do I have to pick one? Um,
No, you don't.
if I had if I had to pick one, I think it really would be to see, just as we were saying, to see midlife as this invitation and this opportunity to really cultivate a much different kind of relationship with ourselves, one that is more unconditional, one that is more honest, one that centralizes parts of ourselves that we maybe haven't allowed to guide us in the decisions that we make. And so this movement from external validation, external achievement, external appearance to internal, what feels right for me? What can I explore? What can I create? And again, the relationship with ourselves that we need to have in order to have the courage to be able to approach midlife in that way. Just this beautiful time of experimentation and evolution that comes with pain and change and struggle.
Mhm.
But if we can see it really as this invitation to deepen our relationship with ourselves, I think it really can be an incredibly transformative time.
Yeah, I think that's such a wonderful message. I couldn't agree with you more. All right. And I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me today. And hopefully, a lot of people will be in contact with you because I think a lot of people in midlife could really use your help to help pivot and reshift or, help their relationship with themselves evolve and improve. So thank you so
Yes.
much for joining me today. And thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed the episode, please take a moment to leave a glowing review. It would make my whole day if you did that. And please share this with your friends and family. Your support means more than you know. Seriously, thank you.